3 miles underground in the dark, a man wrote the time at the top of his letter. 2:30 in the afternoon. The explosion had been at 7:30 that morning. He had been alive for 7 hours inside a mine the whole valley had already given up on. 5 men left 6 letters. Everything in them is exact. Almost nothing written about them above ground that week was, starting with the simplest question anybody asked: how many men were down there? Coal Creek, Anderson County, Tennessee, a narrow valley in the eastern part of the state. Coal on both sides of it, a rail line down the middle. 2 miles west of town was a mine called Fraterville. It had been opened in 1870. It was the oldest working mine in the Coal Creek district, and by reputation, the best one. The Evening Star put it plainly, the day of. The Fraterville mine had always been considered one of the safest mines in the Coal Creek belt. It belonged to the Coal Creek Coal Company. The president and general manager was Major E.C. Camp of Knoxville. The superintendent at the mine was George Camp. The seam had been worked continuously for over 30 years, and the company had already decided to shut it down. That is in the record, too, printed 3 days after the explosion. From the mouth of the mine to the place where the men actually cut coal was 3 miles. Everything that happened that day happened at the far end of a 3-mile tunnel. Monday morning, the 19th of May, 1902. The mine boss checked in 175 miners. Behind them went the boys, helpers, drivers, roadmen. Nobody checked those in. The paper put the number at perhaps 50. At 7:30 there was a roar, and flame came out of the entrance and out of the air shafts. One man came out alive right away. William Morgan, an aged Englishman, a roadman blown out of the entrance by the force of the blast. The papers said the same thing about him every day that week. He could not live. 2 rescue parties went in. One through the Thistle mine, which adjoined Fraterville on the far side of the mountain. The gas stifled them almost as soon as they entered the shaft, and they came back out. The other party went in the main entrance. They got as far as a place the men there called the Parting of the Ways. A heavy fall of slate had closed the passage. They could not move it, and the heat coming back through it told them what they did not want to know. The mine was on fire. At 12:30 they brought one body out. The dispatch describes it in 6 words: an unrecognizable mass of flesh. By that afternoon, the news was moving on the wires, and this is where the record starts coming apart. The Evening Star that same evening. Coal mine horror. Explosion kills 150 men at Coal Creek, Tennessee. Only one escaped. 4 lines further down in the same story under that same headline. About 300 men were at work in the mines. The paper contradicted its own headline before the end of its own first paragraph. Superintendent George Camp was asked for an official statement. He said he was positive that 160 men were in the mine. He also said there may have been from 250 to 300. He could not determine which until an investigation was made. The next morning, the Indianapolis Journal ran it across the top of page 1. Between 175 and 225 probably dead. That is a range 50 men wide, not 50 men rounded off. 50 men whose families did not yet know whether to hope. By the 22nd, the Atlanta Semi-Weekly Journal had it at 226. Contract miners, day laborers, and boy helpers. And then there is the number that came out of Knoxville on the 20th, 225. Same dispatch, and in the same sentence, something no headline that week ever mentioned. A second man had come out of Fraterville alive. His name was Ernest McDonald. He had gone into the mine 15 minutes behind the other men. They found him lying in a spring of water, covered by it except for half his face. told them what he had seen while his breath came in fitful gusts. Both arms twisted from his shoulders, both eyes blown out, both thighs broken. It was impossible, the dispatch says, for him to live more than a few hours. Every headline that week said one man escaped. 2 men came out of that mine alive. Neither of them lived. Nobody went back and corrected the number because by then the number had already been printed 1,000 times. 150, 300, 160, 225, 175 to 225, 226. 6 numbers in 4 days, and not one of them came from a list because there was no list. What the Indianapolis Journal printed instead was a partial list of the victims. Its own words. Scarcely 1/3. Read down it and you stop reading names and start reading households. 3 Whites, 2 Murrays, 2 Bradleys, 2 Discerns, a woman listed as Banny Vowell, and 2 sons. And then 2 entries the paper wrote out in full because a surname alone would not carry them. Charles Whitten and 10-year-old son. Ed Sarl and 15-year-old son. A 10-year-old was in that mine because a 10-year-old could lead a mule and a grown man cost more. Above ground they waited. The dispatch says fully 10,000 women and children were assembled at the entrance. That number is almost certainly wrong. It is also the only measurement anybody bothered to write down. The bodies came out slowly over days. And on the 21st, in an entry off the main heading, the rescuers found 13 men together, all of them dead, and with them 6 letters, written by 5 of them before they were overcome. One of the letters carried the time it was written. 2:30, Monday afternoon. 7 hours after the blast. So the men in that entry survived the explosion and knew it, and sat in the dark doing arithmetic about their own air. The letters were mostly practical. What should be done with the writer's body? What should be done about his business affairs? Instructions on raising his family. One man had nobody. No father, no mother, no brother, no sisters. He addressed his letters to everybody and asked them to change their way of living. And one line from those letters went out across the country. The Atlanta Semi-Weekly Journal put it in the headline deck. "Oh God, for just one more breath," he wrote, as he was strangled to death by gases. And further down the same column on the same page, the same paper printed that line again. "My God, for another breath." 2 versions of a dying man's last written words, in one newspaper on one page on one day. The paper never noticed. Nobody corrected it. We do not know which one he wrote. The letters were what the reporters were reading from, and what the reporters printed is what came down to us. The relief came in fast, the way it does. John Mitchell of the United Mine Workers wired $100. The district president, J.W. Howe, put up 1,000 more and went into the mine himself to look. Cause developed the day after the explosion. Gas had collected in an abandoned mine close by, and an opening into it had been accidentally made the week before. And the state mine inspector, R.A. Shiflett, announced that he would postpone his official examination until the bodies were out and the mine was cleared. He had a reason. He was physically impaired, the paper said, from his recent hard work inspecting the Nelson mine at Dayton, Tennessee, where he had been exposed to noxious gases. The inquest ran into June. On the night of the 23rd at 11 o'clock, the coroner's jury at Knoxville came back. Their verdict charged the mine officers and the state mine inspector with criminal neglect. Read the finding itself, and the same hole is still in it. P.C. Green and about 200 others came to their death on the 19th day of May. About 200 others. That is the official document. 5 weeks after the explosion, a legal finding that used the words criminal neglect and the state of Tennessee still could not say how many men it was talking about. 9 years later, on the 9th of December, 1911, 3 miles up the same valley at Braceville, the Cross Mountain Mine blew. Something had changed. The federal rescue crew came in that afternoon with oxygen helmets and walked into gas that would have killed the men of 1902 where they stood. That was real, and it saved lives later. And one thing had not. Almost 200 men checked in that morning, the dispatch says, but the company has been unable to determine the exact number. 9 years, 3 miles, the same sentence. So here is what the record leaves us. The official count is a range. The victim list is 1/3. The second survivor barely made the paper. And the most famous sentence anybody wrote that day exists in 2 versions in the same newspaper. The only precise document that came out of Fraterville on the 19th of May was written 3 miles underground by a man who knew he was dying and who stopped to put the time on it. 2:30 in the afternoon.